Thanks, Robbie. Thanks so much for having me and allowing me to do this presentation. We're going to talk about everything you need to know about problem gambling. And let's get started off. Hold on. Got to click that. Okay. My only affiliation for now is I'm director of programming for a Kindbridge teletherapy company. And yeah, we work a lot with a lot of companies now doing aftercare for problem gambling, video gaming, all kinds of stuff. Okay, enough of my plug. So, I've been, obviously, by listening to Robbie, I've been around for a really long time. And, I always like trying to get to the best stuff I can. And I've been searching all over to find out who the world's first gambling addict is. Anybody want to guess? Put it you can put it in the chat. But this is after years of who is the very first gambling addict. Okay, so let's get right to it.
Hey, yo, Fred, open up.
What do you want?
How about a game of marbles, Fred?
Marbles? Come right in, boy. I need somebody to practice with. I have to get real good.
Why, Fred?
I got my reasons.
Hey, tell you what, Fred. We'll play for a nickel if you want to bet.
That.
And that's, in the old days, we called gambling addiction a impulse control disorder. Fred obviously has it. What's interesting about that is sometimes people who are not treated at all or anything, you can see that trigger just on that word bet. All of a sudden he went off. Okay, so, and if you want to put your answers in the chat, that would be great. I'm going to give a whole bunch of true and false questions of differences between drugs, alcohol, and gambling. So on the first one, if I said a person with a gambling disorder can chase their first big win like somebody would, like a first big high with an alcohol substance abuse disorder, is that true or false? Okay, Bernadette has true. Linda Beth, true. Yeah, it's obviously true. I still remember my first big win. I don't know how. My mom was working in a school. She got a tip from a gym teacher. The horse's name was Sir Lister. I made a big bet when I was in high school, and the horse came in and won. And, so I sort of never forget that. A person with a gambling disorder has rituals and patterns like a person with alcohol substance abuse, true or false? Okay, okay, you were all smart. You got all trues. Yeah, and gamblers are very superstitious. I almost was really nervous right before this thing started. There were 13 people in the room. I'm glad there's more. But just to give you a really quick example, I gambled a lot, especially in the 70s at the racetrack. And one day I was wearing a Paisley shirt, which Paisley was really big in the 70s, and I had a big win. So I had to wear that shirt every time I went to the track, and it never won again. But, and it's something we'll talk about at the end of the training about gambler's fallacy is I thought that, I couldn't not wear that shirt because I figured it was due to win. I couldn't just toss it. So what about, is gambling easier to hide than drugs or alcohol, true or false? True, false, true. Okay, a bunch of trues. I'm going to go with true. Yeah, you can't smell blackjack on somebody's breath. And gamblers hide it a lot longer, which ends up, affecting a lot more family members or friends or whatever, of being able to borrow money, getting bailouts without letting them know that they have a gambling problem. So gamblers usually don't, until something really bad happens, then generally they're not going to get caught. But based on all my experience, there's so many times where eventually I've heard gamblers share that, they didn't get the mail that day and their spouse found out that they, and finally saw everything. So a lot of times, eventually, somebody does something to give themselves up. A person with a gambling disorder has withdrawal symptoms and cravings, similar to a person with alcohol substance abuse disorder, true or false? Okay, the trues are coming in. That is true. And I'll talk about a little later on what some of those withdrawal symptoms are. They're usually not as pronounced as drugs or alcohol, but they're there. And especially when they first, stop gambling, you'll see them. Is there drug testing to determine if a person has gambled in the previous week? True or false? Yep, all you guys got false. Yeah, I wish we could figure something out and of what to do. I always tell the story. I bought one of those cheap lie detector kits, and I'd always have it on my desk. So just maybe to scare somebody to tell me the truth. And even in gambling, lying in certain games is an advantage. So yeah, it's sometimes really difficult to spot. Just like a person with an alcohol substance abuse disorder, person needs to increase their bets. Is there tolerance? True or false? Yeah, true. And a lot of times it's not just the amount of bet, it might be the frequency of their bet or how dangerous the bet is. Their rent money is on the line or whatnot. It's sort of, the bets get bigger. And we'll talk about dopamine in a few minutes. A person with, and this one's I can never figure out how to word it right. A person with a gambling disorder can have an overdose. True or false? False, false, false. Okay. Yep, it is definitely false. There's no saturation point in gambling, like drug or alcohol, right? You can only do so much drugs or alcohol in a period of time. And what are you going to do? You'll pass out or die if you exceed that. But there's no saturation point for gambling. And, whereas, I've always I've done a lot of groups with drug addicts and alcoholics, and I always ask them, what's the most money you've ever spent in one day? And usually I think the most I've ever heard was 2,000. Well, you can lose 2 million in a day in gambling, and usually has devastating effects. So it makes this question pretty easy. Are demands on finances greater for a person with a gambling disorder? True or false? True, true, true. Yeah, it is definitely true. Most gamblers, I remember there was a statistic about 10 years ago that the average person, when they call a helpline, their debt was around $35,000, $36,000. Gamblers just, money is the drug for gamblers. And gambling is the only drug with this addiction, with this solution that, hey, theoretically, I could win and get all that money back. So when they're in the hole and they're chasing, and we'll talk a little about chasing a little later, they'll do anything, borrow money, take cash advances out on credit cards, because they always think that, today's going to be the day I'm going to win it all back, and so on. Person with a gambling, higher suicide rate for gambling, true or false? True, true, true. Okay, you guys all know what's going on. Yeah, and for that matter it's always really important to be very careful with somebody that will say that they're suicidal. When I worked for agencies, I always made sure that my clinical supervisor always signed off on any time when I thought somebody was doing it. I mean, if you really think about it, I've heard hundreds of thousands of people talk about their gambling. And a lot of times some people are just so buried, they owe out so much money, and it's not that uncommon that in their lifetime they can't pay back the money, or that they just took their kids' college money. That happens quite often, or the mortgage money. Like, everything ties in, especially with the lying, and all those lies catch up and it just really builds up, or they're going to be arrested the next day because they embezzled money from their company. We see that higher rate of suicide. Unlike most people with an alcohol, most with a gambling disorder will admit they have a gambling problem. True or false? False. False. Okay, yeah, it's definitely false. And gamblers are even worse. You ask a gambler, you have a gambling problem, and they're telling you all about their gambling problems. And they'll say, well, do you have a gambling problem? No, I have a financial problem. They think it's more of a money problem than actually the disorder. A person, you think it's harder to stop gambling or drugs or alcohol? Just put in either DA or gambling in the thing. Which one do you think is harder? Gambling or drugs or alcohol to stop? Okay, nobody's really going on that. I'm going to go with, yeah, okay, there's a gambling disorder, gambling. Yeah, I'm going to go with gambling. Think about it right now. You live in Illinois, sports betting is legal. Are you seeing a ton of commercials on television for risk-free betting and things like that? There are so many more triggers out there for gamblers. Like you don't see meth dealers having commercials on TV saying, let's do meth, get things done, clean your house, do everything else. No, but constantly you have that gambling. Gambling has been made more addictive by having more games, quicker games. Just think about now with live betting and everything else that, and plus other people just don't understand your problem like they might understand a drug or alcohol problem. Like, let's say you're having a Super Bowl party, there's going to be a lot of beer there, and you have a friend who's an alcoholic. You might say, hey, there's going to be alcohol here. If you're uncomfortable, it's going to be there. Whereas, they would say, even though they know somebody might have a gambling problem, oh, you could buy, one of those little squares. That's fine. So there's a lot of reasons why I think it's tougher. Plus, gambling is the only thing where you could win and theoretically win and solve all your problems. How about fewer treatment options for gambling? True or false? True, yeah. But you know what? In a way, it's changed a lot since I first got in the business. You have Gamblers Anonymous, which was just very localized. There wasn't a lot of treatment. I worked at one of the only inpatient treatment programs for gambling, and there just was not a lot. But now, in the last 20, 25 years, so many states have free treatment for problem gambling. And I think one of the coolest things is, you can go to Gamblers Anonymous type meetings, or even actually some of them are official GA meetings, 24/7 now on the web. I always ask Robbie now, if you want to just put in the chat, gamblersinrecovery.com. And if you click on gamblersinrecovery.com, you can find a meeting in virtually 24/7. There's always a meeting going on and you can pop into a meeting. So let's talk a little about the history of gambling. I mean, gambling's been around forever. They find rudimentary dice in caves from 40,000 years ago. The Romans invented roulette by putting putting the chariots on the side and spinning the wheels. Some of our presidents were involved with gambling. And I think our only gambling disorder president might have been Andrew Jackson, who once lost his entire wardrobe of clothes on a single horse race. But then let's go into the 1900s. Prior to that, like starting like late 1800s to early 1900s, there were, a lot of like temperance movements also about gambling. And there was most gambling was fairly illegal until 31, when Nevada decides to legalize gambling. 57, GA is established, and that pretty much was the only real treatment for gambling. Lotteries didn't start popping up again until 1964. 72, National Council on Problem Gambling was established, and actually where the first like formal treatment being done for gamblers was at the VA hospital in Brecksville through Dr. Robert Custer, and a lot of work he did, and some other guys like Richard Rosenthal and a few others were able to, because of that facility, get gambling into the DSM-3. Did I get them all? Okay. We could see here, if we look at the legal gambling by state, Nevada had the only casino. We're talking about 1975. And then you could see all the orange states are all just had started lotteries. There was one thing missing really in this, but I'll show you in another map, is horse racing. Horse racing was in a lot of these states, but the only casino state was Nevada. And then what changed in 78? New Jersey became the second state to legalize gambling in Atlantic City. 1980, pathological gambling was first accepted as a mental disorder, and it finally made it into the DSM. 1988, prior to 1988, a lot of the tribes were trying to set up bingo. all kinds of stuff, and the states kept coming in and raiding and whatnot. And finally, in 1988, the US Supreme Court passed the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, and that opened up all these states to go. It sort of means that the governors in the state have to create some kind of compact and some kind of legalized gambling. And it's not unlimited. They don't have to, some are not, like in California, there's no dice or craps, no sports betting. So it's not, it's not like a free for all for the tribes. There are regulations. In 1990, internet gambling begins, and it was mostly early on, mostly sports betting. 2002, then things even really changed. I don't know if anybody's old enough to remember how hot Texas Hold'em was. I mean, it was all over the place. It was on the TV all the time. There was celebrity Texas Hold'em. 10-year-old kids were getting Texas Hold'em sets for Christmas. And I'll never forget, one day I'm watching TV and, they say, oh, there's going to be a piece on teenage Texas Hold'em. And I'm looking forward all day. It's going to be a negative piece. And it turned out to be a very positive piece. Oh, at least we know where our kids are. It teaches them social skills, and whatnot. And, they know where, and also math skills. And as we'll see later on, I can tell you right now, the prevalency rate, for an adult is somewhere between like 0.9 to maybe 1.7 from all the studies I've ever seen. Whereas the prevalency rate for an adolescent being addicted is somewhere between 4 and 9%. In 2013, which I really think is one of my biggest moments, gambling disorder is finally taken out of the impulse control disorder section and put in the substance abuse section. And it's the only non-substance related disorder. I'll talk about that in a minute. 2015. I'm sure you all were bombarded by daily fantasy sports commercials. We were always looking for that, that's going to be the smoking gun. And I can't tell you how many times I was interviewed or how much was going on in the National Council, or everybody's talking, it's going to be a big problem. And, we didn't find too many smoking guns, but it sort of then was the setup for what happened in 2018, when the Supreme Court allows states to offer legalized sports betting. And again, not unlimited. The states have to vote on it and all kinds of stuff. I'll show you a map of how many states already have it. And it's really changed because it also allows for all this marketing. I'm getting, I have to fast forward through all those commercials. When, we'll talk about at-risk gamblers. When they say at-risk, risk-free, for anybody in our business, it's just like nails on a blackboard. And even also with allowing that, states begin to allow interstate. So you can bet lottery or other types of casino type gambling as long as it's within the state's guidelines. So let's do poll question 1. Robbie, you ready?
I am, but you know what? I don't know if I got that in here. I may have to write the second poll question.
You know what? We
can do it through chat.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can do it through chat. So, but I'll write the other ones. So,
okay. So which is not a common similarity of substance, alcohol, and gambling disorders? Is it A, drug testing, B, withdrawal, C, rituals and patterns, D, tolerance? Well, looks like all A's, which obviously is the correct answer. Can I move on, Robbie, or you need
yeah,
to?
Yeah, you know what, I'm good. Thank you though. Thanks guys for answering. I'll have the other one written up as we speak. So
let's talk a little about types of gambling. The first I want to bring up is horse racing. Horse racing is by pari-mutuel wagering, meaning everybody puts their money into one big pool, and the horse that has the most money bet on is going to be the least odds. The horse that has the least money on it is going to have the highest odds. So in a way, it's true market of, just being smarter than the other person, knowing what's going on. But what screws the whole thing out is states take out, depending on the state, anywhere between 15 and 26% of the pool. So that's what you're going against. It's those fees and the taxes that are taken out that make it very difficult to win over the long run. Can you win in the short run? Absolutely. In most forms of gambling, you could win in the short run. There's all different types of bets. There's the standard win, place, or show, a quinella where you pick the first two horses in any order. And then you got two horses exacta, trifecta, superfecta, the double, pick 3 races, 4 races, 6 races. So there's a lot of different kinds of betting. You can bet on the internet in horse racing. So there's so many different options, and then watch it on TV. So if we could see, horse racing is pretty prevalent in the United States. The only states, look, that I could see here that don't have some form of horse racing is Alaska, Utah, Kansas, Mississippi, Georgia, South Carolina, and Vermont. Otherwise, we see it really widespread and a lot of access. And generally, again, you could, these races are on TV. There are cable channels that have TV races, so you can sit in your own house, bet, and watch the race. Casino gambling, some are Native American casinos. Again, those are casinos regulated through the states, through compacts. Generally, they look pretty much like any other casino. There are certain things they do and certain things they don't. Like most Native American casinos do not serve alcohol. Their age is dependent. Like in California, because some of them are 18. You only have to be 18. Other casinos, you have to be 21. Same thing with state regulated casinos. I'm sure it takes a while to get all the legal contracts out, but now you don't have to go to Las Vegas, and most states do have craps and roulette and all other kinds of games. Racinos are racetracks that have a casino in them now, and we're starting to see most racetracks have some form of racinos. There's self-exclusion. Self-exclusion, I'll talk about that now, is where a gambler, who just can't stop, they're in treatment, they're constantly being triggered. They can go to the casino, and sometimes it can be done off property, sign a form. It's usually notarized, you take your picture, everything else, and you voluntarily ban yourself from the casino for a period of, sometimes they're 1 year, 5 year, 10-year, lifetime, depending on the state, depending on the regulation. And what happens if, once you're on that list, if you sneak into the casino and hit a jackpot? Well, first, if you sneak in the casino and they know you, they'll ask you to leave. If you don't want to leave, you've signed a piece of paper saying that they could arrest you for trespassing. And finally, if you hit a jackpot, you don't get the money. And, and that's the tough one. But I can tell you, based on a lot of experience, people will still go in, they'll sneak in. I've seen people, I've heard so many stories of disguises, everything else. But the weird thing is when they hit a jackpot, they know they're going to get caught. So sometimes they'll say, let me switch seats with you, we'll split them up. But no, there are cameras that are watching. So what generally happens is when they hit the jackpot, they don't do nothing. They just get up and walk away and leave the casino with all that money out there on the table, because they don't want to make it more difficult the next time. Casinos have things like credit. You can get credit at casinos. They're similar to a check. Comps, where they'll give you a better park, with these Players Club cards, that monitor how you're gambling. They might give you a better parking spot, free buffet coupons, a room. They might even fly you in or pick you up from the airport with a limousine. The more they're giving you, the more money you're losing. They don't do that to lose money. They just want to make sure people come to that casino because they know they're going to get the money in the long run. The only state that I think gives free alcohol that I know of is Nevada. There are different classes of gambling. You have class 1, 2, and 3, where some are low maximum, sort of like bingo type games, to whereas class 3, it's what you would think is in Las Vegas. If we look at states with land-based casinos, Most states have land-based casinos of some type. Some of them are racinos, non-tribal, tribal, but we could see now the access is just incredible, instead of just having to go to Nevada. Sports betting, that's the big thing right now. It's legalized by state. I'll show you a map of that. They could be in varying venues. They could be online. Like here in Arizona, where I live, all the major sports arenas have sports books in them. Some of the racetracks, even some of the large golf clubs, golf courses have them. And now it's a little different. Like when I gambled, you can only usually bet on whether the team's going to win, maybe over or under. But now you can bet electronically online during the game. And as the game progresses, the lines change. So you can have so many more bets in there. You can bet on specific plays. And, if we really think about the frequency of being able to gamble constantly, I believe it makes it more addictive. How do they make money? It seems like an even bet, right? You pick one team, the other team, it's 50-50. And especially they use the point spread to make sure that it's 50-50. But if you bet $100 and you lose, you have to pay $110. If you win, you only get $100. So that's how they make it. The lines are always constantly adjusted to make sure, because if exactly 50% bet on one thing and 50% bet on the other thing, then they're going to get their 10%. There are legal sports betting. There's like non-licensed offshore bookies. Still the traditional bookie, that you could predict, hanging out at a bar with a cigar in his mouth, getting your money. A lot of times with bookies, you're betting on credit. And still you have these non-licensed offshore. And a lot of now bookies have their own website, and they collect through their own website. And those sites, there's like, there's gambling blocking software like Gamban or Gamblock, and it usually don't work on those sites because they're like sort of independent and differently named. Pretty much I went over all this, the different types of bets. There's a lot of bets. You can bet the over and under for the total score, parlays, or betting multiple. You have to bet on multiple teams. Teasers, bet looks too good to be true, or like the typical exotic bet is who's going to win, what is going to be heads or tails at the Super Bowl. We can see here states with sports betting, if it's about half and half, but maybe slightly more states that have legalized sports betting. But eventually this whole map will be mostly red, except for, I'm guessing, Utah and Hawaii.
Dr. David Reddish of the University of Minnesota explains dopamine's role like this. Let's say you're at a gumball machine and you want to buy a gumball. So you put in your quarter, and due to a freak of gumball machine physics, you get 2 gumballs. This is when the midbrain releases dopamine. Dopamine tells the brain when a reward is especially good, better than expected, and to pay attention to that reward because it might be better than other things in the past for survival. So let's say you put another quarter into the gumball machine, and this time you get 1 gumball. This time the midbrain does not release any excess dopamine. It's not that the gumball doesn't taste good, it's just not a reward that was better than expected. Just to push your luck, you put 1 more quarter into the gumball machine, and this time you get no gumball. This time the neurons in the midbrain release less dopamine because this reward was worse than expected. It's in this way that dopamine acts as a learning signal to help the brain identify, prioritize, and then anticipate new and unexpected rewards over older predictable rewards.
I really like that for a lot of reasons. If anybody's ever seen the whole thing, put it in the chat, the name of that video. Most drug and alcohol treatment centers will show that to their clients. It's really good on the brain disease, but it really explains even gambling really well. But just imagine, gamblers they don't get 2 gumballs, they can get 100,000 gumballs in a shot. So really think about how that dopamine locks that in. And, is money something important to us to have? It could be, here's a strategy in our brain that says, hey, well, we can get money, we can solve problems. Nobody put it in. That's from the video Pleasure Unwoven, probably one of the best videos on brain disease. A lot of it, Pleasure Unwoven, is on YouTube. Okay, so let's get back to defining gambling. When the DSM-3 came out in '80, and this sort of definition moved into the DSM-4, is I love this definition: a progressive disorder, meaning it gets worse, characterized by a continuous or periodic loss of control. By the time people come to see you, they've tried stopping themselves hundreds of times and it just doesn't work. Over gambling with obtaining money to which to gamble. And gamblers are great at being able to find money. I can't tell you in my case, and like I say, thousands of cases, people leave the casino or leave the racetrack saying, I'm totally broke, where am I going to get money? Well, the next day they figure out where they're going to get money. Irrational thinking, thinking that they could beat the odds. Can you beat any game? Sure. In the short term, you can get lucky, but overall, the odds, that casino has the odds in virtually every game except for poker. And so to think that you could live in the wrong term, winning in the long term, or especially slot players, slot machines are designed to pay less than 100%. And I'll pay less than 100%. And people say, oh yeah, I have a system in slots. And then this is really common of all addictions, a continuation of the behavior despite adverse consequences. I can't tell you how many times I took my rent money to the track or to a casino knowing that if I lose, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. And yet I went and gambled anyway. The name of the video is Pleasure Unwoven. Robbie, if you want to put that in the chat. And it was called, in those days, it was called pathological gambling until the DSM-5 came out. It was classified as an impulse control disorder, and it was in the same section as kleptomania, pyromania, hair pulling, things like cutting, and things like that. Okay, so here comes 2013, the DSM-5. It is listed in there as the only non-substance related disorder. Gambling disorder, in case you have clients and you're charting. In the DSM-5, it's 312.31. In the ICD, it's F63.0. They used to have, in the older version, they had a question about illegal acts. They took that out and they lowered the criteria from 5 to 4. And I don't read a lot off these slides, but I like this. And this is on page 586 of the DSM-5. Although some behavioral conditions that do not involve ingestion of substances have similarities to substance-related disorders, only one disorder, gambling disorder, has sufficient data to be included in this section. So, there's been so much, and hopefully some of you who are on this thing will do some research and do some studies. There's usually, grants and everything else. And a lot of people have been doing a lot of work over the last 25 years of really trying to understand about problem gambling. Unfortunately, what I think sometimes some of the gambling entities are using that same data maybe to make things more addictive. So I put this in checklist form because it's usually the way when I'll ask my clients these questions. These are the 9 questions for the to determine the DSM. Gambling with increasing amounts of money, that would be tolerance. Restless or irritable when attempting to stop or cut down, that would be withdrawal. Unsuccessful efforts to stop gambling, that would be loss of control. Whoops, what'd I just do? Hold on. How to get out of, okay. Loss of control. 5, preoccupation, thinking about gambling when you're not gambling. Gambling is a way of escape from problems. I'd say that's probably one of the most common ones. And one fairly unique to gambling is chasing, is, trying to get back your money after you've lost. I can't think of any other addiction where that chasing fits in. Okay. 7, lying. Do you lie to family members, therapists, or others to conceal the extent of involvement with gambling? That would be obviously lying, relying on to provide money to relieve a desperate situation. That would be a bailout. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard this story. You know, somebody said, they're finally desperate, they're going to lose the house, they have to pay the mortgage. And they go to somebody they know has the money and says, you know what, I promise I'll never gamble again if you pay my mortgage this time. And, you know, if you give that person cash, I'm going to say 99 out of 100 times they'll take the money gambling. So I sometimes recommend to families, if they're going to pay one bill, pay the bill themselves. And 9, have you jeopardized or lost a significant relationship, job, or educational or career opportunity because of gambling? So loss of relationship. So those are the 9. The one they took out is the one that says, have you committed illegal acts such as forgery, fraud, theft, or embezzlement to finance gambling? Never understand why they took that out, because sometimes that's a big wake-up call when doing the assessment. So how do we score it? First of all, we make sure one of the only qualifiers is that the gambling behavior is not better accounted for as a manic episode. Severity, mild 4 to 5 yeses, moderate 6 to 7, severe would be 8 to 9. In all my years, very few people come into treatment that are not severe. And then I'm not going to read through this whole thing, you know, just like any other disease or disorder, it could be episodic, persistent, it could be an early remission or sustained remission. So let's talk about types of gamblers. You know, this is the normal gambler are your social gamblers. You know, they know how much, you know, they are aware of how much time they're playing, or they set time aside, or how often they play. And this is really important. You know, I'm sure most of you gamble, and there ain't nothing wrong with gambling. You know, 90% of the people that gamble don't have a problem. But the best way to look at it when you go to a casino or do some kind of venue is look at it as money spent, not money lost. Like it's like going to the movies, you know, I'm going to spend $40 with popcorn, raisinets, a soda in the movie. I'm going to spend $40, right? And you see the movie and the movie sucks. You know, it's not like you have to see go to the ATM, take out money and go to see another movie to feel better. So it's just like, you know, spending money on an entertainment. Serious social gambler, there are some people who have like a very extensive preoccupation, usually single game focus, but here's where they're at. They don't create any problems from it. You know, it's like what they do, you know, they're not going to miss a bill. They're not going to miss their kids' Little League game or whatnot. Even though they love that form of gambling. Professional gamblers are rare. They treat gambling as a job. You know, they study everything and they don't lose control. You know, anybody know, you know, put in the chat what the word is when they lose control, but there's a 4-letter term for that. Then you're antisocial gambler. They use gambling as a means to steal or cheat, but they're different than gamblers that often steal to pay off debts. A lot of people, you know, end up in jail because of their gambling, but not because, you know, they're true criminals. It's just they figured if I could just take that money, I'll win big and I'll put it back. Okay, so let's just break it down like this. Different types of gamblers that we've just discussed. Problem, any negative consequence. You know, it's like that guy in the football who they suspended, whether or not he has a gambling addiction or disorder or anything else. You know, he created a problem by being suspended. I don't know if you're familiar with the story, but he was suspended because they caught him betting on games and lost, banned for a year from playing, cost him about $11 million. Abuse would be sort of a low threshold of criteria. That might be, you know, you answer maybe 1, 2, or 3 of the DSM-5. And I'll show you in another chart, you know, how this really plays out. The term compulsive gambler, that's a GA term. So you imagine, you know, most people use that term, you know, especially, you know, from 57 to 72, there was no formal treatment or anything else. I still identify as a, you know, when I go to a GA meeting or a 12-step meeting as a compulsive gambler. Pathological is the old term from the DSM-3-4, and now we work with gambling disorder. So, you know, these things have been blurred over the years, but they're, you know, but I think it has its purpose of explaining gambling, like explaining drugs with stimulants and depressants. So your action are more your stimulant kind of gambling, And your action type of gambler plays to win money based on skill. They go out there, they have a plan. They like being the high rollers, the big shots. They're yelling at the table and all kinds of stuff. And games they play are games against other people like poker, blackjack, craps, sports betting, and the racetrack. And then you have your escape gamblers who are more like your heroin addicts. So your action gamblers are more like your cocaine addicts, or other kinds of stimulants like that, but especially cocaine. Whereas your escape gamblers are more like heroin, alcohol. And they play against machines. They try and avoid human contact. And they play games of luck, like slots, lottery, pull tabs. And it's a way for them, I was once listening to an Oregon study on it, and there were so many women that identified they loved, because the slot machines were in the bars. They love being able to go into a bar and nobody's going to hit on them because they're sitting in front of a machine. The last thing, that I always try and I use different terms in action gambling, sort of hunter-gatherers. Your action gamblers are hunters. They're going out and they generally turn to be very altruistic people. They want to win. When they win big money, they want to buy everybody everything, bring back money to the cave and give everybody a good time. Whereas your escape gamblers are more the gatherers. They're just looking on the ground for nuts or seeds or whatnot. So just to give you an idea of prevalence, this is off of California study in 2006. When this study came out, it was the most expensive study ever done. I think it cost about $1 million. And they came up with pathological gambling or gambling disorder with a 1.5 lifetime prevalence. And, the numbers looks a little, but then when you look at how many people, we're talking about California, that's somewhere between 250,000 and 500,000 people. Problem gambling, more of, and I think it's a little bigger than that, would be, or gambling abuse would be somewhere between 500,000 to 750,000. And again, at risk, here's a study that says at risk, 9.5% adult lifetime prevalence, somewhere around 2.2 million to 2.7 million. That's why when I see those commercials that say risk-free, I want to jump into the TV set and tell them there is risk. Okay, if we look at like this, the green is the people that don't have any problems. All the way to the left is somebody who never gambled. All the way to the right of the green might be a serious social gambler that gambles a lot, but no negative consequences. They cross over into the yellow. They start to develop problems related to gambling. It could be lying for the first time or missing work because they're chasing money that they had just lost. But the way I always look at it, the people in the yellow, can solve their problems, learn a lesson, and then go back into the green. It's sort of like somebody who's a non-alcoholic that gets a DUI. I mean, they have a problem. They don't necessarily, somebody without a DUI, they don't necessarily quit drinking, but they quit drinking and driving so they can learn from their mistakes. And then when we come to the red, and that line, that black line between the red, between the yellow and the red is always what I say, that's where they cross the line into gambling, into the gambling disorder, where I don't believe you can go really in almost every case I've ever dealt with. Once you're in that red, you're not going to go back to the yellow. You're not going to go back to the green. When you're in the red, that's more like being an alcoholic who just keeps getting the DUIs, even though they know they shouldn't be doing it. So this is an old chart. I don't care. I'm leaving it in. I almost was going to take it out this morning. This was like, there were more questions on this to take the test to become a certified gambling counselor on this than anything. If anybody wants to put in the chat what this is based upon, there's an alcohol version. It's an alcohol version of that. So if anybody knows what that alcohol version is, but I see it pretty much as going the way it is, winning. Eventually, you have to lose. Then you become sort of desperate, when you're losing, to try and get that money. And then they're on the bottom in that yellow box, suicidal thoughts, arrest, divorce, doing other types of getting dopamine from other ways that are a lot cheaper, the withdrawal symptoms, everything else. But, then there's a path up. A lot of times they'll finally realize, reach out for help. It's tough in the beginning. You'll probably be working with them in their critical stage and help them partially through the rebuilding. And finally, for me, it's 39 years, I'm pretty happy. I never thought I'd be, without all the treatment I had and going to GA, I'm in that growth phase. So poll question number 2.
Okay, I did my job actually. And here it is. Okay, guys, escape type gamblers usually play what, according to what Mark just spoke on? Is it A, blackjack? Is it B, horse racing? Is it C, slot machines? Is it D, sports betting? Please make your choice on today's poll question. What are escape type gamblers? What do they usually play? Is it blackjack? A, is it B, horse racing? Is it C, slot machines? Or is it D, sports betting?
Okay, it says 100% answered. Yep, you guys got it all right. It is slot machines.
Okay, guys, make sure you answer your poll questions for us. Thanks.
Okay, let's move down. Let me get rid of that little thing. So what are risk factors? Social learning or genetic, nature or nurture. I think there's a lot of both in there. You're more likely to have a problem if your parents, your grandparents have had problems. And I know they've done a lot of genetic studies, and there has been evidence that there is a genetic component. But a lot of it is, sort of that nature nurture. Some of my toughest clients are young males whose dad took them to the racetrack when they were kids, and that was their great bonding with their dads. And a lot of times, sometimes their dads are in treatment and they get even more upset, that something has been taken away from them. Social community, we saw by that map, all those maps, the availability, the accessibility, proximity. They know who their clients are. They target market. There is a cultural acceptance in certain cultures, like more Eastern cultures tend to think gambling, there's nothing wrong with gambling, and sort of that government endorsement. That's the one that kills me. Oh, you're giving money to the schools by gambling. Okay, let's see what. Okay, internal entrapments. Again, gamblers view the money spent, which is really as an investment versus the cost of playing. I can't tell you how many clients I have had that are accountants who know about money, who are now investing in something with a negative return of investment. Gamblers believe wins are produced by their own efforts. You don't want to sometimes walk. Some sports bettors watching a game on TV, they think, that they can control the game because they're watching it on TV. And you walk between them and the TV and somebody scores a touchdown on the other team, you're in trouble. Now, so here's something that I think is really important, is the gambler's fallacy. Fallacy meaning it's not true, that if something hasn't happened in a while, it's bound to happen. So the most typical thing is slot machines, right? People think if a slot machine hasn't paid off in a long time, then it's bound to pay off. And that's not true. The one thing, they might manipulate certain things about machines, but every time you push that button, it's a random event. And I work a lot with casino employees, especially people in the slot area. And I always tell them, if somebody ever asks you what machine is hot, tell them the ATM machine is hot. Because other than that, if a casino employee would say, wow, that machine hasn't paid off in a long time, somebody will sit on that machine and sorry, let me put my phone on. Oh, they want to give me an automobile service contract. I'm so excited. Okay. Yeah, if something hasn't, they'll sit at that machine if a casino employee will say that machine hasn't happened. So we always make sure the people in the slot area don't say that. Near misses, getting closer, meaning you almost hit that jackpot or your horse almost came in, thinking that, it usually increases the longevity of your play because you think you're getting closer when it's really not. Chasing, if I could win it back, I didn't lose it. Remembering wins, not losses. And we talked about superstitions and systems and rituals. Can systems work? Sometimes systems are good I went through this with one of my colleagues. Systems just maybe can slow things down and not, but still the odds are with the house. Vulnerable populations, Certainly adolescents, I talked about those numbers, somewhere between 4 and 9%. If you look in the DSM-5, I'm pretty sure there's a little section on this. Seniors especially have problems, especially if one spouse dies. The other spouse is looking for that connection, and they'll go through everything. African Americans, Native Americans, veterans, there's so much work now that we're doing with my company and with the whole, pretty much the whole industry of working with veteran, figuring out, because, got a lot of PTSD from veterans, and how do they self-medicate? They're being told don't drink, don't drug, end up gambling. Where I live, where the GA meetings are, it's literally across the street from the VA. I mean, yeah, we have our GA meetings in VA across the street from the biggest casino in town. The LGBTQ community, a lot of it either shame or gender swapping, especially in online poker. Disabled, especially people who are very vigorous. Now they can't do what they want, or especially people who were very competitive who are disabled. Now they're looking for something else. Again, I've dealt with, early on when I lived in California with people coming in from Vietnam or from Afghanistan, from the first time, the big upheaval, and we see a lot of gambling there. And as I talked before, there was a lot more Eastern cultural acceptance. Like Eastern cultures, it's about luck. Western cultures, it's more sin-based. Comorbidity, 76% of inpatient meet the criteria for major depressive disorder. I've done a lot of intakes in inpatient, and it's pretty much true. Almost everyone either has anxiety, depression, bipolar. We see here's a study by California, 8% attempted suicide. We see bipolar, and sometimes gamblers just seem bipolar because when they win, they're manic. When they lose, they're depressed. ADHD, and about 1 in 4 in treatment with alcohol or substance abuse, and they tend to go together. And sometimes you always have to discern which one is the major problem, because sometimes when you solve the major problem, the other problems go away. Medical, I think is, gamblers do not take care of themselves physically. They eat crap. They're up a lot. And sometimes it's, if you see a client, work with a client, you might suggest that they see a doctor. Just imagine with all that stress, risk for heart attack, hypertension, other stress-related physical problems that sometimes slot machines will create and cure all these things: migraines, tension, headaches, irritable bowel syndrome, ulcers, insomnia, and sexual dysfunction. And here are some of the withdrawal symptoms that I talked about before: insomnia, headaches, loss of appetite, physical weakness, heart racing, muscle aches, breathing difficulty, and chills. A lot of times you're not going to see somebody coming in like really strung out, like with drugs and alcohol, but occasionally that does happen. Families, I'll just talk really briefly about families. Women were admitted to the, here's a study from Nebraska. Women were admitted to the ER. Women admitted to the ER were 10 times more likely to be a victim of violence. We see in South Dakota, child abuse arose by 42%, domestic assaults, because people argue over money. Just think about it. Argued with a family member, 29%. And I think the bottom number, this was from the California survey also, 25% lost or jeopardized relationships. I think that number is probably a little higher. And there's another one of those charts, which these charts are based on the Jelinek chart, if anybody remembers from school, the Jelinek chart. And families go through a similar V chart. And I think it's really important to understand about the families. And I'm sure you'll get a lot more training on that. So poll question 3.
Okay, guys, everybody ready? Okay, let's go to 3 here. Make sure you're answering. Okay, the gambler's fallacy, as Mark just talked about, is it A, not following rituals and patterns which can lead to losses? Or is it B, if I win it back, I didn't lose it? Or is it C, if it's something that hasn't happened in a while, it's bound to happen? Or is it D, practicing is an effective strategy in improving slot play winnings? Which one of those? I answered myself. The gambler's fallacy is what? Is it A, not following rituals and patterns that can lead to losses? Is it B, if I win it back, I didn't lose it? We got 7 of 18. Come on, guys. Is it C, if something hasn't happened in a while, it's bound to? Is it D, practicing as an effective strategy in improving slot play? We got 10 of 18.
Well,
11, 12, it's coming. Hold on. 13. Okay. 14.
Are two of them me and you?
I would think so. Maybe one more. I'll give you 5 seconds. Okay. All right. That's good.
Okay, most of you got it back.
Yes.
It's the answer is C. If something hasn't happened in a while, it's bound to happen. Okay, let's get out of that. Okay, we're almost done here. Just a couple of slides. You know, two of the major treatment strategies for treating somebody with a gambling disorder is A, motivational interviewing. There is a high rate of ambivalence, you know, and I've talked to people afterwards, you know, after they've discharged, they're sitting there taking that intake, you know, and they know they need to be into gambling treatment, but they're just saying, you know what, if I quit gambling now, I'm not going to be able to get the money back. Also, gamblers have this really short window. You know, if they're in their preparation, they're calling and they call you, you know, for help. And, you know, I would get, and, you know, it hits your machine, I'd get back to them as quickly as possible because their preparation is, you know, stage is a very short, because once they figure out where they can get money, if they're waiting on hold for you and they figure out where there's money, they're going to hang up. So it's really important to, whenever you're working with gambling clients, to be as prompt as possible. And then certainly cognitive behavioral therapy, you know, they still believe they could win. You've got things like the gambler's fallacy, chasing, you know, of they think they could win. And whereas the odds are against them. Behavioral, the casino's constantly rewarding them, whether through money or comps or anything else. And, you know, it's always a challenge, but not impossible to find recovery awards to sort of balance that out. And again, a very big part of this is financial recovery. And I'm sure there'll be another training on that. And I think this is just basically the last slide. There's all kinds of treatment options. There's certified gambling counselors, licensed teletherapy, IOPs, residential, peer support groups like Gamblers Anonymous for the gambler, Gam-Anon for the family. Celebrate Recovery is a Christian-based 12-step program that takes gamblers, and Smart Recovery is starting to really grow among gamblers because it sort of doesn't have that higher power and a lot of other things that sometimes turn people off from GA meetings. So I talked about self-exclusion. We know about the national helpline is 800-522-4700. There's gambling blocking software, which they're not infallible, but they're a big help of, you know, if you download either GamBam or GamBlock on your phones and your computers, you know, most of the sites will be blocked. And lastly, I think Jody's doing a training for this group too, right?
Yeah, Mark, she's coming in May, and she's going to be talking on financial counseling. Yeah.
Right. And she'll talk about this next one, TrueLink financial debit card. It's probably one of the greatest tools ever. So I'll keep you in suspense until Jody talks about it. But it's a really good way to give somebody money on this debit card, but you could set all kinds of filters of how much money they could spend in one day, where they could spend the money. So that's basically it. Wow, 2 o'clock, well, for your time, 4 o'clock exactly. But I'll stick around if anybody has any questions. You know, I'll turn it back over to Robbie.
Good job, Mark. Thank you. You did. You meant business. You hit it right on. And but thank you for everybody attending. And why we have Mark, we've got a couple of minutes, and he's offered his time to stay a little bit longer. If you guys do have questions, Mark is one in the business. We work with a lot of speakers, a lot of people, subject matter experts. But I'll say, and Mark knows, a lot of times if I get stuck with one of my cases in my practice, I'll call Mark. Mark has been in this game for a long time. So if you have any questions regarding this talk or anything on gambling disorder, Thank you, Bernadette. You're getting some great compliments here, Mark. We've got them for a couple of minutes. So thank you, Mark, speaking on that. And thank you for, talking about the TrueLink credit card. You and I have talked about this. I know you had worked with them in the past, but what a great tool that is when we look at and talk about financial counseling and, putting those walls up to access to money. That's just one of the things that perhaps a lot of, working with those who suffer from disordered gambling, it comes to that at times. But that is a great tool, along with self-exclusion, which I know a lot of the LifeWorks people know about. I know working the lines and starting off working on the Illinois lines, we still get a lot of calls on how do I stop getting mail from the casinos? How do I stop, I don't want to go in there and, turn my money over to the casino anymore. So a lot of the folks on this call from LifeWorks knows about some of these tools. You do have a question here, Mark. Thank you, Christy. I have a question. What is the largest demographic for disordered gambling?
I don't think there is one. I think that it crosses, it used to be a question on a test I used to give. It crosses all barriers. Yeah, pretty much a lot of those vulnerable populations that I talked about in that slide probably are the larger demographics, especially seniors, Asians, young males. It also depends. The demographics go with the game. You're going to see a lot more young guys with sports betting. You're going to find a lot more seniors with slot betting. But it crosses all boundaries. What's the difference?
Yeah. And then we've got another question, Mark, here. I see a huge struggle with those gambling online via their cell phones, since they cannot just put their phones down. Is there a specific strategy that's helpful for this population?
Well, there's two. There's one is they could put the GamBam or the GamBlock on their phones.
Yep.
But sometimes what we had to do when I worked at inpatient, somebody was discharging. I know this sounds crazy, but we'd make them get flip phones, buy those cheap flip phones so they couldn't have a smartphone. It's really tough, to do that. I think there are some companies working on software that limits the amount of time that you can go to certain things, but that's also a way off. Yeah, it's really tough. I'm glad I didn't have that when I was gambling, or the internet or things like that.
Yep. And Mark, I've run into like a lot of my clients, my caseload are young males, sports gamblers, smartphones, and they have told me, Robbie, give me the software you think that's best, and I'll find a way around it.
Yeah, no, I tell, it's true. Like there's so many ways around it, and as I said before, a lot of the bookie sites, the personal bookie sites, they have not picked up by the blocking software. Now, what I tell them is, here's some integrity. If you want a little integrity in here, on all the companies like GamBam or GamBlock, if you get into a site, you can call them up and say, block me from the site, and then they'll put that site in on it.
Yeah. And they have those measures too. It's similar to self-exclusion, but blocks that you could do. Even the lottery, you can, I believe, self-exclude. So Linda Beth asked, will the PowerPoint be sent out? Mark, if you're okay with it,
Yeah. Did I
okay.
send it to you?
Not yet. So
I'll send it to you.
Oh, thank you, Mark. So Linda Beth, I'll have it. Here's my email. You should have it if you're, I'm not sure, but I'm going to put this just in case. And you have Mark's here as well. But let's see here, LifeWorks. Any other questions for Mark?
Yeah, and feel free to email me if you ever have a question or something that you want. My email is pretty easy, mark@kindbridge.com.
Yep. And again, Mark's been around the block and worked in this industry for years and been training in this industry. When I took this position, the person who worked in Mark knows Matt and Marie, he told me to look out for Mark. Mark's got a lot of great things to teach, and he was right. So Mark, we appreciate your time.
Thanks so much.
We appreciate you coming on. I know you've got a sports injury you're working through, and I hope that gets better. And thank you for coming on anyway, man. Showing up and suiting up, Mark. That's what it's about.
It is.
All right. Well,
just to finish.
Sure.
if I was gambling, I'd figure out how to make it to the casino with my leg like this. There'd be, even before, internet, I would be at the casino or the track or a card club or somewhere.
Yeah.
And probably not even feeling the pain when I'm gambling, which is what I like about doing these trainings. Like the whole 60 minutes I was here, I didn't feel anything because I was into something that I love to do. So thanks for having me.
Well, we appreciate your work. And thank you, everybody, for being on. Mark, I'm sure we'll talk soon. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. See you, Mark. Get better, man. All right, buddy.
Thanks. Bye.